You cannot blame me for it, Beatrix. I wish your cousin had said yes. I have never pretended otherwise. Julian Marchbank, 5th Duke of Roseley, heard the sentence come out of his own mouth in the dark of the carriage, and knew, in the half-second afterwards, that he had done something he could not undo. His betrothed did not answer at once. The carriage went on down the Roseley drive with the lamps swinging, and Julian sat with the taste of his own words in his mouth and waited for tears, because, in his experience of women which was, he would later be forced to concede, entirely theoretical, that was what came next. Then there was a small sound of a glove being drawn off. "Give me your hand," said Beatrix Lowell. "Beatrix." "Your hand, your grace." He put it out. She turned it palm up and set something in it, and closed his fingers over it, and it was warm from her skin. The Roseley betrothal ring, 3 generations of emeralds, valued at £1,100. "Then ask her again," said Beatrix. "Do not be absurd." "I am the least absurd person in this carriage." Her voice was perfectly level, which he found more alarming than shouting. "Georgiana refused you in February. You proposed to me in March. It has taken you 5 weeks and 1 glass of your own claret to tell me why, and I am obliged to you, because I had begun to invent reasons of my own, and mine were far more flattering to you than the truth." A pause. "Stop the carriage, please." "We are half a mile from the house." "I am aware. I walked it this morning." "Beatrix, it is nearly midnight, and it is raining." "Yes," said Beatrix Lowell, "and I have walked a great deal further than half a mile in worse than this, because I am a poor cousin, and poor cousins are always walking. Stop the carriage, or I shall put my head out of the window and instruct your coachman myself, and then he will know, and by breakfast the whole of your household will know, and you would infinitely rather it were done quietly." Julian rapped on the roof. She got out. She stood a moment in the wet with the lamplight on her, a small, sharp-faced young woman in a made-over gown, 23 years old, with rain already in her hair, and she looked up at him in the doorway of the carriage with something he could not read at all. "You are not a cruel man," she said. "That is the wretched part. If you were cruel I could hate you and be comfortable. You are simply a man who has been permitted his whole life to say the first thing in his head to somebody who cannot afford to leave the room." She stepped back. "I can afford it. It will cost me every prospect I have, and I can afford it. Good night, your grace." And she walked off up the Roseley drive in the rain, and Julian Marchbank stood in the door of his own carriage with £1,100 of emeralds in his fist, and could not think of one single thing to say. By 9 the next morning she had gone. Not to her father's, that would have been a scene, and Beatrix Lowell, he was learning at a rate he did not enjoy, did not do scenes. She had gone to the house of her old governess in the town, and from there, within 4 days, to a position, reader and amanuensis to a Mrs. Verrill of Cheddon, an elderly authoress of some local celebrity, at £35 a year. Julian discovered all of this from Georgiana. His former object came to Roseley on the Friday Lady Georgiana Devoy, who was beautiful in the manner of the illustrated papers, and considerably cleverer than the illustrated papers ever suggested. And she walked into his library without waiting to be announced, and stood in front of the fire with her arms folded. "You told her that you wished I had said yes." "How do you?" "Because she wrote and told me herself, in 3 lines, on the grounds that I should hear it from her and not from the county. That is the sort of woman you have thrown out of a carriage in the rain." Georgiana's chin came up. "Julian, we have known each other since we were 9. Do you want to know why I refused you in February?" "I have been told. My reputation, my temper, my 400 acres of—" You never once asked me a question, said Georgiana. Not one in 11 weeks. You told me a very great deal. You were extremely eloquent about your intentions and your improvements and your objections to the new turnpike. But you never asked what I thought about anything, because it had not occurred to you that the answer would alter your plans. She said it without malice, and it went in accordingly. And then, 3 weeks after I refused you, I sat at my aunt's dinner table and watched you talk to Beatrix for 40 minutes about the drainage at Cheddon Marsh, and I watched you ask her twice what she would do about it. And I went home and told my mother that you were going to marry my cousin, and that I was glad. Julian stood very still. You are mistaken, he said. I'm never mistaken about this, and you are the last man in England qualified to tell me so. Georgiana picked up her gloves. You did not propose to Beatrix because I refused you. You proposed to Beatrix because you spent 5 weeks being interested in her and had no vocabulary for it. And so you reached for the only story that made sense to a man of your kind, that she was second best and had been fortunate. And then you said it out loud to her face. She went to the door. She is at Cheddon. She will not come back if you send for her, and she will not come back for the ring. And if you go there and are eloquent at her, she will refuse you in about 4 sentences, and she will do it far better than I did. Then what am I to do? Lady Georgiana Devoy turned in the doorway, and gave him the first genuinely kind look he had had from her in 14 years. Ask her something, she said. He went to Cheddon in May, and made every mistake it was possible to make in a single afternoon. He arrived in the barouche with 4 horses, which was the first error. He sent up his card, which was the second. He was shown into Mrs. Verrill's parlor and found himself facing an authoress of 81 who looked at him with frank enjoyment and said, "Ah, the Duke. She said you would come in something showy," which was the third and not his fault, but which he minded very much. And then Beatrix came in with a pen behind her ear and ink on her thumb. And Julian, who had composed 900 words in the carriage, opened his mouth and delivered all of them. He told her that he had been at fault. He told her that the sentence in the carriage had been thoughtless, and that he had not meant it in the way she had understood it. He told her that the ring was in his pocket, that the settlements were unaltered, that her father was in agreement, that no one need ever know, that the marriage could go forward in July with no more said, and that he was prepared. And he was rather proud of this phrase, having worked on it, to consider the whole misunderstanding as never having occurred. Beatrix Lowell heard him out to the end. Then she said, "Have you any questions, Your Grace?" Julian stopped. "I beg your pardon. You have spoken for 11 minutes. I timed you on Mrs. Verrill's clock. It is a hobby of mine now." She took the pen from behind her ear and set it on the table. "You have told me what you think, what my father thinks, what the county need not know, and what you are prepared to consider. You have not asked me one thing, not whether I am happy here, not what I do all day, not why I got out of the carriage." Her voice did not rise at all. "I do not want the ring. I never wanted the ring. I wanted to be asked something. Good afternoon." And she went out and shut the door quietly, and the ancient authoress in the armchair said, with immense satisfaction, "Oh, that was worth £35 a year of anybody's money." Julian Marchbank went home and did not go back for 5 months, and they were the 5 most useful months of his life. He did not write to her. He wrote instead to Mrs. Verrill once, asking a single question, whether he might be permitted to send books, and received a reply of 4 words, "If they are good." He sent books, not gifts, nothing bound in white calf with his crest on it. He sent the things he was reading with his own pencil in the margins, and the first parcel contained a treatise on land drainage, and a novel he had been assured was frivolous and had enjoyed enormously. There was no letter. On the flyleaf of the treatise he had written one line, Page 61 is wrong about clay and I cannot say why. What do you think? 9 days later a parcel came back to Roseley. Inside the treatise, on a half-sheet in a small determined hand, page 61 is wrong because the author has never stood in a wet field in February. Clay does not behave. Neither do tenants. Have you read the appendix? He has, and it contradicts him. BL. Julian read it 14 times, and then went out and walked round the lake twice in the dark, grinning like an idiot. That was how it went, through a summer and into an autumn. 11 parcels. He asked her about the Cheddon Marsh drains, and she answered in 3 pages, and told him his steward was being lied to about the culverts, and she was right, and it saved him £400. He asked her what Mrs. Verrill was writing, and she said a history of the county, in which every landowner would be given exactly the space his conduct deserved, and that the Marchbanks presently had a footnote. He asked whether he might be told what was in the footnote, and she said no. In September, he asked the question he had been circling since May. Why did you get out of the carriage? I have supposed a dozen reasons, and I no longer trust any of them, because they are all mine. I should like yours. The answer took 3 weeks to come, which frightened him considerably. Because my mother did not, it said. She was a poor cousin too, and she married a man who told her every day for 19 years in 100 small pleasant ways that she had been fortunate. He was never cruel and she was never anything but grateful, and she died at 44 having said, so far as I know, one honest sentence in her life, and it was to me, and it was, "Do not be grateful, Beatrix, it eats you." So when you said what you said, I heard 19 years coming and I got out. I would have got out if you had been the King of England. It was not really about you at all, which I expect is the most humbling thing I could tell you, and I am afraid I am not sorry. Julian sat with that letter for a long time in the small hours, and then he did the only sensible thing he had done all year. He went and asked his own housekeeper about his own mother, and was told a number of things about the late Duchess of Roseley that made him understand exactly which house he had learned his manners in. He went to Cheddon in October, on horseback, alone, and stood at the gate rather than sending up a card, and waited until Beatrix Lowell came out with a shawl over her head to see who was cluttering the lane. "You have no carriage," she said. "I have no carriage, no ring, no settlements, and no speech." Julian pulled off his hat. "I have 3 questions and then I shall go, whatever the answers are." Beatrix folded her arms inside the shawl. "Ask." "First, are you happy at Cheddon?" She blinked. "Yes, tolerably. It is £35 a year, and my time is my own after 6 o'clock, and Mrs. Verrill says whatever she pleases and lets me do the same. I have been happier here than I was in 5 weeks of being engaged to you, which I have thought about a good deal, and which I do not say to wound you. It does not wound me, it is information, and I am collecting it." He turned the hat over. "Second, if you were to marry anybody, not me, what would you require? Not what you would accept, what you would require." That took her longer. "To be asked," she said at last. "About the estate, the tenants, the money, the children, the church, all of it, and to be answered when I ask back. To be contradicted in front of people, because being agreed with in public and overruled in private is how it was done in my mother's house. And never, not once, to be told that I was fortunate." Her chin came up. "I know precisely what that list is worth on the open market, Your Grace. It is why I am at Cheddon." Julian nodded slowly. "Third," he said, "may I tell you one thing that is not a question, and then ask the question properly?" "You may." "I have thought about that sentence in the carriage every day for 7 months, and I have discovered that the worst part of it is not that it was unkind. It is that it was not even true." He looked at her. "I wish your cousin had said yes. Beatrix, I do not wish it. I did not wish it in that carriage. I said it because you had spent the evening being funny about the bishop, and I had spent the evening watching you, and I did not know what to do with the fact that I had been watching you, and so I reached for the nearest respectable explanation of my own conduct, which was that I was disappointed and settling. It was a lie I told about myself, and you happened to be sitting next to it. Georgiana refused me because I never asked her anything, and she was right, and I did not understand what she meant until you counted 11 minutes on an old woman's clock. I have spent 5 months learning to ask out of parcels at £400 profit and a great deal of embarrassment. I am not cured. I shall very likely say something stupid before Christmas. But I no longer think of you as a woman who has been fortunate, and I am not certain I ever did. I only said it, which I have come to see is nearly as bad, and rather more permanent. The lane was very quiet. Somewhere in Mrs. Verrill's garden, a blackbird was going through the hedge. "That is not a question," said Beatrix, and her voice had lost its level at last. "No." Julian went down on one knee in the mud of the Cheddon Lane, hatless, with no ring in his hand at all. "Beatrix Lowell, I am asking, not offering, asking, and prepared to be refused, and prepared to come back next October and ask again, and the one after that, because I have nothing else I would rather do with my Octobers. Will you marry me? And will you tell me the truth if the answer is no, because I would rather have your no than anybody's yes?" Beatrix Lowell stood in the gateway with her shawl over her head, and the rain beginning again, and she was crying, and she made no attempt whatever to stop. "You have ruined a very good pair of breeches," she said. "Yes. I shall want the emeralds eventually. Not now. In a year, perhaps, when I am quite certain, and I shall want it understood by everybody that I was asked twice and refused once and took my time." "It shall be in the notices," said Julian. "And the footnote in Mrs. Verrill's history is to stand exactly as she has written it." "What does it say?" "It says the Marchbanks improved their drainage in 1827 upon the advice of a paid companion." Beatrix wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "It is the sentence I am proudest of in the world, and if you make her cut it, I shall never forgive you." "It stands." Julian was still on his knee. "Beatrix, you have not answered." "Get up," she said. "Get up, you ridiculous man, and ask me one more time on your feet where I can see your face." He got up. He asked her. She said yes. They were married the following October. She took her year, and took it in public, and the county talked itself hoarse. And Lady Georgiana Devoy stood as her cousin's chief attendant, and wept so extravagantly that 2 separate people assumed she was the disappointed one, which she permitted to circulate for years because it amused her. Mrs. Verrill lived to 86 and finished her history, and the footnote stood and grew in the second edition into a paragraph. Beatrix was contradicted by her husband in public, frequently and with relish, and contradicted him back at his own dinner table in front of a Lord Lieutenant, and the Roseley drainage became a thing men came from 3 counties to look at. She never in 38 years heard herself called fortunate, and the one guest foolish enough to say it in her hearing was answered by the Duke mildly over the soup. "You have it backwards. She refused me once and made me ask again in the rain, and I have never in my life been so glad to be told no. Everything I have that is worth having, I have because a woman got out of my carriage."